Hey there. Tonight, you are only a few steps away from a medieval tent. And the strange truth is that the tent is not really warm, not really dry, not really safe. And yet for the soldier dragging himself across a frozen field, it still feels like mercy. A scrap of canvas can become a kingdom when the wind is trying to bite through bone. So, if you enjoy stories like this, please take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, and then let the room grow dim. Let your shoulders unclench. Let your jaw loosen, and let your breathing settle into something slow and even, because we are going to spend the night in camp, where men slept in smoke and damp wool and still somehow woke in the morning. You are walking through a field that has already forgotten the kindness of autumn. The ground is hard in some places, muddy in others, and every step gives you a new complaint from the body. Your boots are stiff. Your shoulders ache from the drag of armor and straps and damp fabric that never quite dried after the last miserable day. Breath leaves your mouth in pale clouds and hangs in front of you as if the air itself is reluctant to move. Ahead, the camp glimmers. Not brightly. Nothing about it is bright. Just low fires, canvas shapes, a few moving shadows. Still, after the open cold, it looks almost tender. If you were standing here with me, you would notice the smell first. Wood smoke, yes, but not the cheerful sort from a clean chimney at home. This smoke is mixed with wet earth, horse sweat, old leather, and the faint sour note of men who have marched too long in the same clothes. The whole place smells tired. Honestly, that may be the most accurate word for a medieval camp in winter. Tired canvas, tired fire, tired bodies. Even the ropes seem exhausted as they groan in the wind. The tent waiting for you is lower than you hoped. You have to bend to enter, and the moment you do, your back protests with the bitter honesty only a cold body can produce. Inside, the darkness feels close. Canvas presses in. The air is warmer than outside, but only in the way a cellar is warmer than a grave. It is not warmth that relaxes you. It is simply the absence of the full assault. The wind does not strike you cleanly in the chest anymore. It has to argue its way through seams first. Your hand brushes the inside wall. The fabric is rough, damp, and a little colder than you expected. Condensation clings there like a second skin. Smoke stains reach upward in black smudges, evidence that men before you tried to bring a little fire too near this canvas world. The whole structure feels temporary, and it is. Medieval tents were never miracles. They were logistics, bundles of cloth and poles hauled on wagons, raised when needed, dropped when the army moved, patched until the patches needed patches of their own. A noble might sleep beneath a pavilion with enough height to stand and enough room to imagine dignity. A common soldier usually got something smaller, meaner, and more honest. You lower yourself onto the ground and immediately understand the true enemy. Not the air above, the earth below. The soil has stored the whole memory of the cold day and now offers it back to your bones without generosity. There is some straw here, some cut rushes, a few broken branches, one flattened shield shoved beneath the edge of a sleeping place where someone, perhaps with rare good sense, decided that wood was better than frost. A soldier in winter did not dream first of a thick roof. He dreamed of not touching the ground. That is the quiet revelation of this night. Medieval soldiers did not survive by finding comfort. They survived by building tiny barriers between themselves and misery. A little canvas over the head, a little straw under the ribs, a little smoke in the lungs, if smoke meant heat. History can sound grand when told in banners and battles, but here it becomes small. It becomes the thickness of cloth. It becomes the difference between lying on mud and lying on wet rushes. It becomes whether your body can keep enough of its own heat until dawn. Some scholars argue that the tents themselves were barely worth the trouble. Snow could creep through the seams. Rain could sag the roof low enough to drip on sleeping faces. A hard wind could turn the whole thing into a drum, beating all night above men who already had too little sleep and too much fear. Others point out that even a poor shelter changes the arithmetic of survival. Pack enough men together under cloth. Stop the direct sweep of wind. Keep bedding off the frozen ground, and a miserable tent becomes a life-saving machine. Not a good machine, not a kind one, but enough. And enough mattered. You can hear the others settling. Armor set down with dull little knocks. A cough in the corner. Someone muttering a prayer that sounds less devout than exhausted. Somewhere close, a man shifts and the straw crackles beneath him like thin ice. You smell damp wool, sharp and animal, and beneath it the sweeter, dusty scent of old straw. It is almost farm-like for one brief second, and then a draft snakes over your ankles and reminds you this is no barn. No one here will wake to milk cows and complain about weather. These men will wake and march, or fight, or die, and that knowledge sits in the tent even when nobody speaks it aloud. One of the strangest little details in records of medieval campaigning is how practical men became about the ground itself. Branches, high, rushes, spare boards, broken equipment, shield faces. Anything flat enough and dry enough could become a sleeping platform. I have always found it strange that the most important piece of bedding in a war camp was often not what covered a soldier, but what separated him from the earth by one desperate inch. It is not glamorous, but then the truth rarely is. A knight might have better fabric, more servants, a more generous tent. Even he still needed some answer to the frozen ground. Rank could buy more comfort, but not immunity from weather. You stretch your legs and immediately feel one heel sink where the mud below the straw has not quite frozen. The wetness does not soak through at once. It only threatens. That may be worse. There is a special kind of anxiety in knowing your bedding is one small shift away from failure. You move carefully after that, like a man negotiating with the floor. Beside you, someone has piled cut rushes almost neatly, as if order itself might preserve warmth. Another soldier has made a nest of hay and thrown his cloak over it, producing something that, from a distance, looks nearly soft. Up close, it looks exactly like what it is, a compromise made by a tired man under a hard sky. Outside, the ropes creak. Stakes complain in the earth. The whole tent flexes with the weather like a living thing. You breathe slowly and listen. There is something hypnotic in bad conditions when there is nothing to be done about them. The mind stops demanding perfection. It starts cataloging details instead. The smell of smoke trapped in cloth. The cold at the tip of the nose. The way one knee always finds the hardest patch of ground. The way everyone settles with little sighs that sound almost embarrassed, as if the body itself apologizes for needing rest. Medieval campaigns often pushed into late autumn and winter, not because commanders were eager to freeze their own men for sport, but because war rarely paused for comfort. Roads turned ugly. Supply trains slowed. Rivers hardened or flooded. Fires mattered more. Bedding mattered more. Shelter became not a luxury, but a daily argument with the season. In some campaigns, soldiers probably stared at their tents and wondered if these sagging cloth shells were truly protecting them or merely giving them a more organized place to suffer. You adjust again, then stop, because constant movement only lets more cold in. That may be the first lesson of the night. Stillness has a purpose. You gather your body in. You tuck your arms close. You let the canvas walls and low roof do their modest work. Around you, the sounds settle lower. The coughs space out. The mutters fade. Someone near the entrance lets out a breath so long and weary that it makes another man laugh softly. Not a cheerful laugh. More the kind a person makes when reality has gone just beyond reason. In that laugh is the whole camp. Misery, routine, acceptance, and a little dark humor to keep the mind from turning against itself. If you look closely at this world, the mystery of how they slept without freezing is less about a single answer and more about layers. Layer over layer. Straw over mud. Canvas over wind. Men over loneliness. Routine over panic. You do not conquer the cold. You reduce its access. You narrow its roots. You make it work harder for every inch of you. The fire outside sends a faint orange pulse through one seam, then another, not enough to light the tent, just enough to remind you that there is still something living beyond the cloth. You can smell it more clearly now, the warm, bitter note of burning wood threading through the damp. It reaches you in waves, and with it comes a quiet thought. This place is poor shelter, but shelter all the same. The tent is both sanctuary and tormentor. It is low, wet, drafty, crowded, and absolutely precious. You lower your head onto a rolled scrap of cloth and feel one stalk of straw pressing through where it should not. You are too tired to care for long. Sleep will not be deep. Not at first. It will be the cautious sort that keeps one ear open to wind and footsteps and coughing. Still, even that thin beginning of rest is a victory here. Another soldier turns somewhere in the dark. The canvas rustles. A rope knocks softly against a pole. The field beyond the tent may be full of frost and silence, but in here, life persists in little sounds. And that, more than the cloth itself, is what starts to make the shelter feel real. Not the quality of the materials, not the craftsmanship of the poles, the breathing, the shifting, the shared stubborn decision to lie down inside this dim enclosure and trust that it will be enough. You close your eyes and let the night gather around those sounds. Outside, the cold keeps its patient watch. Inside, men begin the slow work of enduring it, one cramped sleeping place at a time. And before long, the body starts to look for the next thing that might hold warmth a little closer. Not the tent now, but the cloth wrapped around the skin itself. Sleep will not come all at once. It will come in little patches. A drifting moment, a startle, another careful descent. Medieval soldiers did not simply lie down and disappear into comfort. They negotiated with the night, again and again. The body tries one position, rejects it, tries another, finds a hidden stone, a wet patch, a draft sliding under the hem of the cloak. Rest becomes a conversation with the cold, and the cold is patient. The smells thicken now that everyone is down. Smoke caught in wool, damp leather releasing its sharp sour note, straw giving off the scent of old fields beneath everything harsher. You almost get used to it. That is one of the strangest things about hardship. The body learns the air, however ugly, and begins to call it familiar. You slide one hand lower and feel the little architecture beneath you. Straw, cloth, something flat and firmer, maybe a board, maybe a shield. Not much, and yet it is the whole strategy in miniature. A little lift from the ground, a little less cold, a little more time until dawn. Around you, everyone becomes a breathing shape beneath cloth, listening to the same wind, hoping the same fire holds. The tent cannot offer luxury, but it can offer this narrow, defended space where the body may try to forget the field outside. That is enough to begin. And once that beginning is accepted, the next layer of survival waits very close, wrapped around the skin itself, in wool, folds, and the heavy, stubborn cloak that must now do the work of blanket, mattress, and shield. You pull the cloak closer, and at once the whole night becomes smaller. Not kinder, but smaller. The rough wool drags against your chin and cheek, scratchy enough to remind you it once belonged to an animal and has since belonged to weather, road, smoke, and too many weary hands. By daylight, it is simply clothing. By night, it becomes nearly everything. Blanket, wall, pillow, roof within a roof. Medieval soldiers leaned on cloaks with a kind of desperate faith, not because the garments were luxurious, but because wool, stubborn and ordinary, could still hold a little warmth even when the world around it had turned mean. I have always found it strange that medieval comfort was so often built out of garments already exhausted from use. A cloak by campaign season was no fresh, clean article. It was heavy with old smoke, rain, marks, grease, and the faint shine left by repeated wear. Some had grown almost weatherproof by accident. Oils and dirt pressed so deeply into the fibers that drizzle rolled from them better than it had when they were new. That sounds disgusting. And it is. But camp life rarely asked what was pleasant. It asked what worked. You tuck the lower edge beneath your legs and feel a little pocket of trapped warmth begin to gather. Not much. Never much. Still, the body notices quickly. The shoulders loosen a little. The jaw unclenches, Your breath no longer strikes the open air quite so directly. Across from you, another soldier does the same, drawing his cloak over his head until he looks less like a man and more like a bundled shape in a dark painting. One by one, the others vanish into wool, brown, gray, faded blue, mud-stained, almost black near the hems. The tent turns into a field of soft mounds, with the occasional hand or boot protruding like evidence of humanity beneath the cloth. Some scholars argue that wool cloaks truly were one of the great survival tools of the medieval camp, and I think there is sense in that. Wool does not surrender at the first sign of damp. It keeps trying. Even when the outer layer goes clammy, some warmth remains trapped deeper in the folds. Others point out, correctly, that no cloak alone can defeat frozen ground or an all-night wind. Wrap a man only in wool and lay him on winter soil, and the earth will still take what heat it wants. That debate matters, but perhaps not as much as the lived reality. A cloak may not be enough. It may still be the difference between almost enough and not enough at all. You roll slightly and feel the folded edge press under your shoulder blade. Not comfortable, better. That is the phrase that belongs to the medieval knight. Better than the open air. Better than no wool. Better than bare ground. Better is a real category in camp life. A man learns to treasure it. The cloth smells strongly now that it is so close to your face. Smoke, lanolin, stale weather, a little old sweat. Under ordinary circumstances, the odor might be offensive. Here, it is nearly reassuring. It smells like continuity. It smells like something that has already kept you alive through other nights, and may keep you alive through this one too. Then there is the next truth. Cloth helps. Yes, but a soldier in winter learns that warmth has another source, one less dignified and far more reliable. Other bodies. At first, it is only an accidental bump. Someone shifts in the dark, and a shoulder meets yours. There is a brief, irritated exhale, the sort that says a boundary has been crossed. But the irritation does not survive long, because the heat arrives with the contact. It is faint, but unmistakable. Human warmth, trapped beneath another man's cloak, radiating outward into the narrow, cold space between you. Instinct does the rest. You edge a little nearer. Not enough to confess what you are doing, just enough to borrow what can be borrowed. This happened over and over in war camps. Men slept close because there was little room, because tents were small, because rank and weather had a way of crowding everyone inward. Yet closeness was also strategy. Chroniclers describe soldiers sleeping, packed together in heaps, on crusade, in winter marches, in miserable roadside encampments, where a man alone might shake all night, but a cluster of men could build a small republic of heat. No poetry there, just mathematics of survival. One body loses warmth. 5 bodies share it. It is one of the least romantic and most human truths in military history. Now the tent changes again. It is no longer only cloth and poles and ground cover. It becomes a furnace of poor design but genuine effect. Someone presses at your back. Another pair of knees folds close near your boots. A wool-covered arm brushes your sleeve. The air between bodies grows less sharp. The smell grows much worse. Obviously, smoke. Breath, damp cloth, feet, leather, and the close, trapped heat of men who have marched and sweated and not properly dried. Yet even this, after a while, becomes part of the comfort. Better foul, warm air than noble, clean frost. There is humor in it, too, because there has to be. One soldier mutters that he would prefer a feather bed. Another, half asleep, tells him to marry a goose and be done with it. A faint laugh passes through the dark. You know that feeling when people are too tired to laugh properly, so the sound comes out thin and cracked, and all the more honest for it. That is the laughter of the tent now. Small, tired, but alive. Historians still debate what such closeness did to morale. Did it build comradeship, the kind born only when men are reduced to pure necessity together? Or did it breed resentment, irritation, the quiet hatred of another man's snore or elbow or smell? I suspect it did both. Human beings are rarely consistent enough for cleaner answers. The same body that warms you may also crowd you. The same companion who saves you from freezing may cough in your face and wake you 4 times in the night. Medieval camps were not schools of pure brotherhood. They were schools of endurance, and endurance often included affection and annoyance folded tightly together. You curl one hand under your neck and listen. Breathing all around. One loud snore, wet and persistent. One quiet wheeze. One man whispering something that might be a prayer, might be a complaint, might be the memory of a woman far from here. The tent has become intimate against everyone's better judgment. In daylight, you might not willingly share a bench with half these men. At midnight, you share air, heat, and inches. Outside, the fire continues its patient work. You smell it before you see it through the seam. Burning wood, bitter and sweet together, reaching inward in pulses whenever the wind changes. Then there is the color, faint orange bleeding through canvas low to the ground, enough to shape the darkness without defeating it. Fire is the true center of camp, even for the men lying inside tents, pretending to sleep. Without it, the whole place would feel abandoned. With it, however fragile, there remains a sense that the night is being answered. Campfires in medieval war were never merely decorative. They cooked food, dried cloth, boiled bad water into less dangerous water, marked positions, gathered men, lifted spirits, and in winter, quite simply kept bodies from sliding too quickly toward disaster. Archaeology gives us blackened patches in old encampment layers. Chronicles give us the rest. Men crouched around flames, with hands extended, boots lying near the heat, guards checking embers before checking anything else. Fire was logistics. Fire was morale. Fire was hope, behaving like chemistry. Yet it was also trouble. One spark in dry cloth could turn a tent into a torch. Too bright, a glow could expose a camp to eyes in the distance. Too little fuel, and the fire shrank into a taunt. Soldiers knew all this. That is why the fire was often banked low, tended carefully, fed in measured patience rather than wild abundance. You can hear that patience now. Not a roaring blaze. Just the little civic sounds of maintained embers. A snap, a hiss, The collapse of a small branch inward. Someone outside, stirring coals with a stick. The heat from the main fire does not truly reach you through the tent wall, not in any dramatic way. What reaches you is more psychological. The knowledge of flame, the smell of it in the cloth, the faint color leaking through seams. That may sound slight, but slight things matter at night. A soldier lying under a cloak feels less alone if he knows there is still a ring of embers breathing outside. Fire promises continuity. It says the camp is still held together. It says the dark has not won every argument. Some armies place their tents around fires with deliberate care, shaping little communities of warmth. Some men even tried to carry embers in pots, clay or metal, banking coals under ash so that the morning would not have to begin from scratch. I find that image almost heartbreakingly practical. Not carrying treasure, not carrying beauty, carrying tomorrow's fire, cradling a little future warmth through the dark. There is something deeply human in that. There is one more thing the fire does. It divides time. A campfire allows watches. It allows the hour to be marked by stirring embers, by changing guard, by the call that drifts through the dark from somewhere beyond the tents. Without such rhythms, the night would become shapeless. With them, even misery can be organized. That matters more than we often admit. Human beings can endure a great deal if it comes with pattern. A fire that must be tended, a watch that must be kept, a turn to sleep, a turn to wake, a chance to hold your hands over coals before crawling back beneath the cloak. The man near the entrance coughs deeply and then settles. Another lets out a long nose whistle of a snore, then stops, then starts again. For a few moments, nobody speaks. The tent is full now of the three great defenses of the medieval soldier at night. Wool, shared body heat, fire, none perfect. Together, almost enough. You draw the cloak over your shoulder more fully and feel the trapped warmth gather in the little hollow between chest and knees. It is still an uncomfortable posture. Cramped, almost childlike, but that too has logic. The body curls to protect its middle. Heat hoarded close is better than heat spent generously into cold air. There is wisdom in the curled sleeping soldier, even if the pose would look absurd to anyone expecting martial grandeur. Medieval war was full of swords and banners by day. By night, it was full of men trying to become smaller so they could stay warm. And still the night goes on. The fire outside lowers, then rises again with some fresh feeding. The scene glows. The glow fades. Breath moves all around you. The cloak scratches at the neck. Your cheek grows warm where it touches folded wool. Your feet are colder than the rest of you, but less cold than before. That counts. Everything counts. If you were to stand above the tent now and somehow see through canvas, what would you find? Not heroic poses, not tidy rows. You would find a heap of bundled figures, arranged by exhaustion and temperature more than by intention. Knees tucked, shoulders curved, hands hidden in folds, cloaks overlapping, faces half buried. A little accidental architecture of survival made from cloth and trust and the refusal to waste body heat on distance. That is how the soldier begins to sleep, not because the tent is warm, but because within that bad shelter the body has found its allies. Wool against skin, comrades against cold, fire answering darkness from just outside the wall. The sleep that follows will still be thin and interrupted, but now it has a chance. And in a winter camp, a chance is often the only luxury worth naming. You let your eyes close again. The fire breathes through the seam. Someone sighs near your shoulder. The cloak holds its smells and its heat. Outside, the field stays frozen and indifferent. Inside, men endure together, and the night, for the moment, softens enough to carry them a little farther. The first sleep never lasts. It only visits. You drift for a few minutes, perhaps longer, and then some small cruelty of the camp brings you back. A boot knocks lightly against your ankle. A coal outside collapses with a sharp little hiss. A draft finds the seam above your shoulder and trickles down the back of your neck with the intimate malice of cold water. Your eyes open into darkness that is not complete, because the tent still breathes with a faint orange pulse from the fire beyond the canvas. And for one dazed moment, you do not know whether you are waking in safety or simply surfacing inside the same discomfort you never really left. That may be the truest thing about sleep in a medieval camp. It is not a clean plunge. It is a series of negotiations. The body tries to descend. The world objects. The body tries again. You pull the cloak tighter, and the movement wakes another man just enough for him to grunt in protest and then settle against you even more heavily than before. His warmth annoys you for half a heartbeat, then wins its argument. That is the whole philosophy of night in camp. What helps you may also irritate you. What irritates you may keep you alive. A damp cloak smells bad. It still matters. A snoring companion steals your quiet. He also shares his heat. An overfed fire might smoke everyone half blind. A dying one leaves men shivering until dawn. Nothing is simple. Everything is weighed in discomforts. Outside, somewhere deeper in the camp, a horse stamps. The sound arrives through layers of cloth and distance as a dull, rhythmic thud, followed by the rattle of tack and the soft, sharp exhale of an animal that has no more love for the weather than you do. Then another sound follows, the low murmur of a man on watch speaking to another. Not alarm, not urgency, just that careful midnight voice people use when the whole world has narrowed to cold hands, sore feet, and the next hour to be survived. Watch duty is its own private misery, and everyone in the tent knows it. Even the men pretending to sleep more deeply than they are know that some poor soul outside is standing with spear or bow or sword, shifting weight from foot to foot, trying not to let his mind soften into woolly half-dreams. Medieval armies could not surrender fully to darkness. Someone always had to stay in it awake. Sentries listened for movement beyond the camp, for the wrong step, the wrong creak, the wrong whisper carried on the wind. They were not only watching for enemy scouts, they were watching for theft, panic, loose animals, accidental fire, and that most tiresome of all human hazards, the sleeping camp itself, going stupid in the night. Honestly, I have always had sympathy for the guard who has to stare into blackness while everyone else competes for warmth. There is something especially cruel about being denied even bad sleep. Inside the tent, bad sleep continues its patient work on you. Your body aches in places you would not have believed could ache. One shoulder from lying crooked. One hip from the hidden hardness below the straw. The calves from the march. The back from the weight of gear. The hands from the constant little violences of daily soldiering. Gripping cold metal. Hauling rope. Cutting wood. Buckling straps stiff with weather. The body keeps a ledger. Night is when it presents the account. You shift again and discover that the cloak beneath your left side has become damp from the earth. Not soaked, only damp enough to send a little warning upward through the cloth. It feels almost insulting. The ground has been waiting all this time, quiet and patient, and now reaches up to remind you that every barrier in camp is temporary. Straw flattens. Cloth drinks moisture. Heat leaks away. Sleep slips. Medieval shelter is less a fixed condition than a constant maintenance of small failures. Some commanders, of course, had better arrangements. A nobleman's pavilion could include rugs, chests, in-servants, thicker bedding, even a brazier when the circumstances allowed it. But the farther you move from rank and wealth, the more the grand machinery of war reveals its simple core. Most men on campaign slept with what they could carry, what they could steal from the landscape, and what they could borrow from one another's bodies and patience. The image of the splendid medieval camp belongs mostly to paintings and imagination. The reality, especially in cold seasons, was a long, damp argument with hunger, mud, and insufficient cloth. You can smell the mud now when the draft changes. Not the lively smell of spring earth, but the heavy mineral scent of ground that has been trampled by too many boots, wheels, hooves, and spilled things. Medieval camps were not clean communities briefly dropped onto open fields. They were crowded temporary towns. Men cooked, pissed, bled, sharpened knives, cleaned harness, cursed, prayed, vomited, laughed, and slept all within a shifting geography of ditches, ropes, fire pits, baggage carts, latrine edges, and hurried paths stamped flat between them. After a day or two, the place gained its own atmosphere, and after a week, perhaps its own personality. Not one anyone would choose voluntarily. There is another little sound inside the tent now. Lice or fleas, perhaps not heard exactly, but felt as a small itch at the neck, then another at the wrist. You scratch without ceremony. So does someone else. Medieval sleep came with company. Insects shared the bed as loyally as comrades did. Wool, straw, crowded bodies, reused blankets, all of it encouraged a tiny democracy of parasites. No chronicler needs to tell you this once the body starts reporting it for itself. The itch is proof enough. A man near your feet murmurs in his sleep. You cannot catch the words. Maybe he is home for a moment in his dreaming. Maybe he is counting money he does not have, or hearing church bells, or seeing a wife who has become more memory than face. That too belongs to camp life. Men brought their whole unfinished selves into tents. Their debts, grudges, fears, hopes, and sin. old injuries, their jokes, their bad habits, their love for places now very far away. A soldier did not cease to be a person when he crawled under canvas. He simply became a colder, more crowded version of one. The fire outside drops lower again. This time, the seam darkens almost completely, and you feel the effect before you think it. The tent has not changed size, yet the darkness makes it feel larger and less secure. Amazing what one little suggestion of flame can do for the nerves. Somewhere, one of the watchmen is probably crouching now to rake embers together, feeding the fire not only with wood but with morale. It is a humble form of leadership, really, keeping coals alive so sleeping men do not wake in despair. Some military historians like to speak in terms of logistics, and they are right to do so. But logistics sounds so polished next to what it truly meant at midnight. Logistics was dry wood. Logistics was enough hay. Logistics was wagons arriving before men began eating their belts in imagination. Logistics was whether there were spare cloaks, spare pegs, spare rope, spare hands to dig drainage if rain came. When the big words are stripped down, they become very small objects in the dark. You hear rain for one sickening instant, or think you do. A soft ticking at the canvas roof. Your whole body stiffens. Then it stops. Branch drip, perhaps. Melt water from frost, perhaps. Not a full shower. The body relaxes, but only partly. This is what weather does to men who live outside long enough. It trains the nerves into jumpy little instruments. One hint of water, and every muscle remembers past nights. Wet boots, soaked bedding, smoke that would not rise, dawn arriving like an insult. A proper storm could turn camp sleep into theater of misery. The tent roof would sag. Rope lines would complain. Puddles would form in the clever little hollows no one noticed by daylight. Cloaks would grow heavier. Straw would sour. Men would sit up cursing softly in the dark and try to save what could be saved. Some camps dug ditches around tents to lead water away. Some did not. Some remembered too late. Medieval armies were fully capable of courage on the field and complete foolishness in camp. Human beings have not changed that much. For now, though, the rain does not truly come. Only the cold, the closeness, and the long, slow procession of waking and sinking again. You decide, with the solemn seriousness that only exhaustion can produce, that if morning ever arrives, you will stand closer to the fire, dry the hem of your cloak, shake out the straw, perhaps even move your sleeping place if the camp remains here another night. This is one of the secret comforts of fatigue. It makes tiny plans feel enormous and reasonable. Tomorrow you will fix everything, says the man lying on a shield in damp wool while scratching at fleas. Tomorrow will be an age of reform. Then a ridiculous thing happens. The man snoring nearest your shoulder stops. The silence left by the missing sound is so sudden and unnatural that your eyes open again. You wait. 1 second. 2. Then he erupts with twice the force. A wet, triumphant blast of noise that startles another soldier into swearing. A few men laugh, low and exhausted. Even you smile into your cloak. Camp humor was often nothing more than relief wearing a foolish face. This matters more than it may seem. Laughter in a bad tent is proof that misery has not yet become despair. It means the men still belong to themselves a little. The night goes on. The ground continues stealing heat. The cloak continues giving some back. The shared warmth of the bodies around you grows steady now that movement has settled. Outside, the sentries trade places, or perhaps simply stamp, harder to keep blood moving. Inside, the air turns thick, breathed and rebreathed and faintly warm. You would never have called this place comfortable by daylight. Somewhere past midnight, comfort becomes less a standard than a ratio. Less cold than outside. Less exposed than the open field. Less alone than a ditch. Enough. You close your eyes again and try to imagine how many armies before this one did the same thing. Romans in leather and wool. Saxons under rough hide and cloth. Normans. Frenchmen. Englishmen. Germans. Nameless levies with aching backs and cheap boots and all the same little midnight negotiations. War changes banners, kings, and weapons. But the sleeping soldier remains strangely constant. He seeks dry ground. He hoards heat. He curls around himself. He listens for danger. He half dreams of home. The thought is oddly soothing. Not because suffering is noble, but because it is shared across time. If you were standing here with me, kneeling in this tent, listening to these small sounds and smelling the smoke trapped in wet wool, you might feel the centuries press in close. Not grand history, but intimate history. The history of bodies trying to endure a winter night under cloth. And slowly, after all the shifting and scratching and listening, sleep begins to gather weight again. The noises do not stop. They simply become part of a pattern. Snore, breath, fire, wind, horse, rope, cough. The mind stops resisting them one by one and lets them join together like a rough lullaby played by tired men in cold weather. You sink a little deeper this time. Just before you go under, another thought drifts through. Dawn will not solve everything. It will bring stiffness, smoke in the eyes, and probably a breakfast unworthy of the name. But dawn will also bring movement, and movement means blood, and blood means heat. For now, though, the body has only one task. Stay covered. Stay close. Stay still enough to keep what warmth it has. So you do. And in that dim, suffocating little world of canvas, wool, mud, insects, and borrowed heat, the soldier sleeps again. Not peacefully, not beautifully, but truly, which is more than enough. Outside, the fire keeps its low red watch, and beyond it, the camp sprawls in darkness, full of other tents, other wakeful men, other cramped, exhausted sleepers, all held between midnight and dawn, all waiting for the first gray light that will show what the cold has done to the world beyond their little cloth walls. The gray light arrives reluctantly, as if dawn itself spent the night under bad canvas and would prefer another hour hidden from duty. At first there is only a thinning of darkness. The seam of the tent is no longer black, but charcoal. The shapes around you become bodies again, instead of mounds. A knee, a boat, a hand gone pale with cold where it has slipped free of the cloak. Someone near the entrance coughs the night out of his lungs, and the whole little world begins the sad creaking process of returning to usefulness. This may be the cruelest moment of all. Not the coldest, not the wettest, not the loudest. Just the moment when the body realizes it must move. Your first attempt at straightening one leg produces such a deep ache through the thigh and hip that you almost laugh. It feels absurdly personal, as if the night had worked on you with small tools while you slept. The man beside you pushes himself upright with the solemn expression of someone rising from old age rather than one miserable camp night. Around the tent, the others do the same. Groans, little curses, a hiss through the teeth when a cramped foot touches earth. Medieval mornings did not begin with heroic leaps to readiness. They began with men unfolding themselves from bad sleep like bent knives being forced open. The cloak that kept you alive now feels twice its weight. Damp at the hem, stiff at the shoulder, rich with smoke and the smell of your own night breath. You shake it once and a fine rain of dust, straw fragments, and who knows what else falls from the folds. One or two fleas perhaps lose their footing in the disturbance. Small victories, then the real problem announces itself. The cold you held at bay while lying still has merely been waiting for your movement. Stand up, and it comes back with all the offended dignity of a gatekeeper denied. It enters under the lifted cloak, through the loosened collar, across the hands that must now untie, roll, gather, buckle, and prepare. The body warms by motion, yes, but first motion exposes it. Outside, dawn has shown the camp for what it always was, less mysterious now, more pitiful and practical. Smoke lies low over the ground in blue streaks. The tents are not romantic silhouettes, but sagging shapes streaked with damp and mud at the base. Rope lines gleam with condensation. Patches show on canvas where repairs were made in poor light and poorer circumstances. Fires have shrunk to dull beds of coals ringed with boots, scraps of split wood, and the marks of men who crowded near them in the dark. Horses stand with lowered heads, their breath puffing pale. Somewhere a groom curses at a stiff buckle. Somewhere else a wagon wheel complains before it has even begun to roll. Mourning does not improve the beauty of camp. It only reveals its mechanisms. You step out, and the air hits like a wet cloth, chilled on stone. Every smell sharpens. Trampled mud, dung from the horse lines, ash, boiled grains from some pot already set over a revived flame, leather going sour where it never dried properly. There is also that particular morning smell of campfires brought back to life. Half-charred wood, bitter smoke, and the faint hopeful sweetness of heat beginning again. It is not a kitchen smell. It is a survival smell. Men are everywhere now, though hardly any look fully awake. One squats near the embers, blowing patiently through a hollow reed or through cupped hands to coax a spark into flame. Another stands with cloak thrown wide, turning one side, then the other toward the fire, as if he means to toast himself back into humanity. A pair of soldiers beat at their boots to loosen dried mud. One man simply stands motionless with a cup in his hand and stares into the morning like a philosopher who has discovered that existence is mostly wet wool and disappointment. The first work of dawn in camp is never glamorous. Shake out bedding. Stamp warmth into the feet. Check whether anything has been stolen, soaked, or broken in the night. See who looks feverish. See who did not sleep at all. Soldiers learn to read one another quickly in the morning light. A man who moved too slowly might just be stiff. He might also be sick. A man too cheerful was suspicious on principle. A man silent and efficient was usually safest to copy. And then breakfast appears, which in camp often means only the earliest available argument against weakness. Some pottage, if fortune smiles. Coarse bread if supply held. Beer or weak ale, more often than not. Perhaps yesterday's meat, if there was any to begin with, and it has not hardened into something better suited for repairing walls. Medieval campaign food was less cuisine than fuel measured against scarcity. Yet, even a poor breakfast feels magnificent after a bad night. Warmth taken inside, the body counts differently. A mouthful of hot grain can do more for morale than a speech. Pots begin to bubble. Someone slices bread with the concentration of a jeweler. Steam lifts from one kettle in a pale, ghostly plume. Men crowd close with bowls, wooden or metal, depending on luck. The smell is simple. Oats or barley, perhaps peas, perhaps onion, if the saints are in a charitable mood. Still, in the cold morning air, it smells almost luxurious. Hunger is an excellent cook. You cup your hands near the fire first, because hands decide everything. Warm fingers can fasten straps, adjust cloak pins, lift bowls without fumbling them into mud. Cold fingers are treacherous little things. They forget obedience. As the heat stings them back toward life, you become aware of the camp's music changing. Night noises have been replaced by morning ones. Hammer on wheel rim. Harness buckles struck free of frost. Sentries reporting to those relieved. A far voice calling for water. Crows somewhere beyond the baggage. And under all of it, the endless smaller sounds of men scraping, chewing, coughing, spitting, tightening, rolling, preparing. Some historians emphasize battles, and naturally they do. Battles are dramatic, brief, and generous to narrative. But armies lived mostly in these hours before and after, in cold camp mornings where the true labor of survival took place. Fires had to be raised. Sick men noted. Horses fed. Tents dried if possible. Gear checked. Orders passed. Water fetched. Latrines used. Reluctantly, but with urgency. None of this is heroic in the painted sense. All of it is heroic in the bodily sense. The sense that says life continues because ordinary, ugly tasks get done anyway. You take your portion and sit on an overturned bucket or a rolled bundle, or perhaps simply crouch with everyone else near the warmth. Steam touches your face. The bowl warms the palms. The first swallow almost hurts because the mouth is colder than you thought. Then the heat slides downward, and the whole chest seems to remember what a home once was. One of the men jokes that if the cook watered the pottage any further, they could float the baggage over it. Another answers that at least then the horses might finally taste some seasoning. Thin laughter, but welcome. Food in camp had another function beyond nourishment. It reassured men that the army still possessed shape. No breakfast, and anxiety spread like mold. A poor breakfast, and grumbling rose but order held. A warm breakfast, and even miserable men began to believe the day might be manageable. Armies marched on many things, but one of them was certainly the little psychological miracle of a hot meal after a freezing night. One soldier has hung his cloak over a line between two stakes, trying to dry with the night soaked. Another spreads straw from inside the tent so the worst of it can air out. These are the domestic acts of war, and I think they deserve more attention than they usually get. The maintenance of sleeping life. The quiet economy of staying functional. If the army is moving that day, the whole camp begins to contract around the idea. Tents will come down, poles stacked, pegs pulled, sometimes stubbornly from frozen ground. Canvas rolled damp because waiting for full dryness is a luxury the road does not respect. If the army stays, then there is another kind of work, improving the little world, deepening drainage, rearranging bedding, gathering fuel, cursing yesterday's choices and preparing to repeat them with minor revisions. Either way, the night is never isolated. It sends consequences into morning. You look back once at the tent you left. In daylight, it appears even smaller than it did in darkness. It is almost embarrassing that so much hope fit inside it. Yet it did. That is perhaps the most honest lesson of all. Human beings are capable of investing profound gratitude in very poor shelter when the alternative is open, cold, and no company. The medieval soldier did not need a perfect refuge. He needed a break in the wind, a little cloth, a little straw, a little fire, and other men breathing nearby. Give him that, and dawn could find him alive, stiff, hungry, unwashed, and entirely ready to complain about it. There is dignity in that, even if it arrives wearing mud. Another camp morning unfolds around you now with its plain, relentless competence. A farrier already works at a hoof, bent low and patient. Men stand at the camp edge and come back looking almost philosophical. Life resumes not elegantly, but fully. The army, which overnight seemed only a collection of bundled suffering creatures, becomes once more a machine. Awkward, loud, temporary, but moving, and still. Beneath all the visible labor, the night remains present. It lingers in the stiffness of backs, in the smoke trapped inside every fold of wool, in the flattened straw under the tent walls, in the way men keep edging toward warmth whenever a task gives them half a chance. A medieval camp morning is really just the night translated into movement. You finish the last of the pottage and scrape the bowl clean. Nothing wasted. Nothing romanticized. The body thanks you in silence. Around the fire, another man stretches so dramatically that several joints answer with little cracks. He grins as though this is a festival entertainment. Someone else says he sounds like a cart going over stones. More laughter. There it is again, that stubborn little humor, the safest fire in camp. If you were standing here with me now, boots sinking slightly in cold churned ground, bowl warming your hands, dawn smoke drifting across the tents, you would understand the answer to the question that brought us here. How did medieval soldiers actually sleep in tents during winter war? Not well. Not warmly enough. Not beautifully. They slept by layering solutions that were individually inadequate and collectively just enough. Canvas to break the wind. Straw to cheat the ground. Wool to trap what heat the body could spare. Shared closeness to multiply it. Fire to hold the dark at a distance and promise morning. Routine to prevent panic. Humor to prevent despair. That is how. And once you see it clearly, the whole camp changes shape in the mind. It is no longer a picturesque background to battle. It is the true landscape of military life. Cold mornings, smoky dawns, rolled cloaks, flattened bedding, men remaking themselves from near sleeplessness into action. The war may be decided elsewhere, on some field under banners. It is endured here, in the little ugly republic of tents and fires, where bodies are restored just enough to march again. The sun rises a little higher. Someone calls for assembly. Someone else ignores it for one stolen second longer near the coals. You set down the bowl, draw the cloak back around your shoulders, and feel its familiar scratch, its weight, its lingering damp, its saved warmth from the fire. Tonight, unless luck changes, you will fold yourself beneath it again. Perhaps in this same place. Perhaps in some other field. Another tent. Another seam glowing with firelight. Another night of borrowed heat and broken sleep. For now, though, morning has done its work. It has pulled the camp out of darkness and made everyone visible again. Men, ropes, horses, mud, smoke, cloth, and all the little humble arrangements by which life persists in war. And as the camp stirs fully awake, the answer remains with you, as plain as ash on a cloak. They slept through winter war not by defeating hardship, but by sharing it, managing it, and waking ready to begin the whole rough process again. By the time the sun has lifted itself above the low winter haze, the camp has lost whatever softness darkness gave it. In daylight, everything shows its true face. The mud is not merely dark, but churned with straw, dung, ash, and the sharp prints of hundreds of boots. The tents are not mysterious shelters, but patched skins stretched over tired poles. The men are not shadowy warriors waiting for glory, but cold human beings with reddened noses, cracked knuckles, and cloaks that carry last night's smoke like a second lining. And still, the day improves them. That is one of the strange mercies of a military morning. Movement restores what sleep could not. A man who looked half dead before the fire now carries a bucket, argues over a length of rope, kicks life back into his stiff feet, and begins to resemble himself again. Blood answers labor better than blankets. Shoulders loosen. Breath deepens. Even the eyes sharpen once the camp gives them enough to do. Around you, the business of staying alive unfolds with the same seriousness as battle drill. One group hauls wood from a hedgerow cut back the evening before. Another gathers old straw to shake and turn, trying to save what can still be used beneath sleeping bodies when the sun goes down again. Horses are rubbed down with coarse cloth and impatient hands. Tack is checked for cracks. Saddles are lifted, slapped, adjusted, then lowered again. A cookpot is scraped clean with a care that feels almost tender. A torn mitten is sewn. A snapped strap is replaced. A bent tent peg is hammered straighter against a stone. This is the true texture of campaign life. Not banners, not trumpets, not the painted moment before the charge, but constant small repairs against collapse. You walk a little beyond the fire line and feel the camp under your boots as if it were a living thing. Here, the ground is firm. There it sinks suddenly. Here ashes have been scattered. There a puddle hides beneath a skin of frozen crust. You learn quickly that camp walking has its own intelligence. You do not step where the earth looks smooth, because smooth earth in a winter camp is usually lying. You step where others stepped, where the frozen ridges hold, where the churn has dried just enough to bear your weight. A man ahead of you slips anyway, one foot sliding from under him in a slow, graceless movement that ends with both arms flung wide and one boot buried to the ankle. There is a burst of laughter from 3 nearby soldiers. He swears with the dignity of a bishop dragged through a pig yard, then laughs himself as he yanks free. That, too, is part of camp order. If you cannot laugh at a fall into mud, the mud has already defeated you. Beyond the nearest rows of tents, the army stretches outward in long, untidy patches of purpose. Baggage wagons stand like blunt wooden animals, with frost still clinging to their rims. Lines of laundry, if one can call them that, have been strung between poles and spear shafts. Socks, cloths, and strips of wool hanging stiff in the weak light. At one end of the camp, a smith has already coaxed a small traveling forge into life. The air there rings with metal on metal, bright and hard, a morning sound sharper than any bird. At another end, a pair of men argue over ration distribution with the grim passion usually reserved for theology. Nothing excites honesty like hunger. A cold camp becomes domestic with unsettling speed. People build habits, even in misery. They invent corners of order. They know where the better fire stands, who carries a needle, who hoards salt, who can be trusted to wake on time, who cannot be trusted with a loaf of bread unless watched like a fox near a hen roost. And like any village, it has ranks. If you let your eyes travel across the ground, the differences begin to show. The common tents are cramped, low, practical, half swallowed by the earth around them. The tents of captains or nobles stand larger, their ropes cleaner, their entrances less abused by mud. A better pavilion might have rugs laid down over boards or bundled brush, thicker bedding, servants moving in and out with that quiet, urgent competence servants in all centuries seem to master, perhaps a brazier too, if fuel and caution permit. It would be foolish to pretend that all soldiers suffered equally. They did not. Rank bought more cloth, more room, more dry wood, better food, cleaner straw, and often a little privacy. Yet even the best winter pavilion was still only a negotiation with weather. Canvas remained canvas. Frost did not bow very low to heraldry. A nobleman might sleep softer than a foot soldier, but he still heard the wind. He still woke if rain found a seam. He still depended on fire, wool, and the patience of the men serving him. Medieval hierarchy could soften hardship. It could not abolish it. You pause near the horse lines, where the smell is stronger, warmer, more alive than anywhere else in camp. Steaming breath hangs around the animals in pale bursts. Their hides carry the thick, honest scent of sweat dried into hair, leather rubbed by use, oats, dung, damp hay. One horse turns its head toward you with the solemn, melancholy expression horses always seem to wear in winter, as if they alone understand the full comedy of human ambition. Its flank twitches when a stable hand brushes away mud. The hand is quick, practiced, affectionate without sentiment. War depended on horses, but horses were also daily work, daily cost, daily worry. They had to be fed before glory, rubbed before strategy, watched before sleep. A campaign could survive many forms of discomfort. It could not long survive failing animals. Nearby, a young soldier holds out his palms to a companion who is binding a cracked knuckle with a strip of linen. The cloth is not clean by any generous standard, but it is cleaner than the hand and therefore good enough. The injured man winces. Once, then nods. That is medicine here more often than not. Wrap it. Bind it. Keep moving. Winter opens skin everywhere. Lips, fingers, heels, the corners of the nose. The body becomes a map of tiny failures. One tries to patch faster than cold can widen them. By midday, the weak sun has done almost nothing for the temperature, but it has changed the color of the world. Frost has retreated from the tent ropes. Mud has awakened from hardness into stickiness. Smoke lifts a little better. Men take off gloves when they can, then put them back on with sighs of regret. The camp feels busier now, more confident, because daylight always flatters human competence a little. Night reduces everything to exposure and fear. Day permits the illusion of control. It is only an illusion, of course, but it helps. You spend part of the afternoon helping rearrange the interior of the tent. This is not grand labor. It is the kind of thing no poet would trouble to mention, which is perhaps why it matters. Old straw is dragged out and beaten loose with a stick. The driest portion is kept. The darkest, wettest clumps are thrown aside. Cloaks are shaken again. A second layer of brush or spare cloth is considered beneath the sleeping place, then rejected because there is not enough for everyone. Someone suggests shifting the bodies so the tallest man lies nearer the rear wall, where the draft is worse, but the space longer. Someone else objects because that same rear wall collected damp. A debate follows with the seriousness of a council meeting. This is one of my favorite truths about historical hardship. It does not erase pettiness. It refines it. Men who might tomorrow march into danger together can still argue earnestly over who slept nearest the least offensive patch of ground. But such arguments are not trivial to them. Good sleep in a winter camp is wealth. Better straw is treasure. A place away from the opening flap is almost office. The joke would have been obvious to them too. That is why the argument ends in half laughter, one compromise, and a mildly insulting remark about the size of one man's feet. Later, while carrying an armful of brush toward the rear of the tent line, you pass the camp edge and look out over the country beyond. Bare fields, low trees, a sky the color of worn pewter. and suddenly the whole army behind you feels absurd. All this cloth and iron and smoke and shouting dropped into a winter landscape that never asked for it. For long stretches of the day, the soldiers are simply inhabitants of a difficult town. They mend, fetch, cook, clean, chew, curse, rest, and try to improve their bedding. The war is real, but it is threaded through ordinary acts so densely that the ordinary can almost hide it. A messenger rides in sometime after midday, horse dark with sweat despite the cold. Heads turn at once. News is heat of another kind. Orders may mean movement, delay, battle, retreat, longer encampment, ration, change, extra watch, any number of things that instantly reshape a soldier's private hopes. The rider goes to the command tents. For a while, rumor breeds faster than rabbits. We march at dawn. No, 3 days hence. No, the enemy has crossed the river. No, supplies are coming. No, they are not. Camp life fed on uncertainty, almost as heavily as it fed on grain. When the answer finally filters outward, it is simple enough. Another night here. You would think this would bring relief. In part it does. No one longs to strike wet canvas at dusk and stumble half-frozen to some new field. Yet relief curdles quickly into calculation. Another night means more wood needed, more straw wanted, more water to fetch before dark, more patience, more smoke, more shared body heat, more wrestling with the same hard ground. The day turns at once toward preparation. This is the true afternoon work now, not battle readiness, but sleep readiness. Fires must be better laid. A trench near one tent deepened so water will not pool if weather shifts. Cloaks aired. Socks wrung and dried if possible. Men sent to gather whatever brush, fern, reeds, or cut branches can be stolen from the landscape and turned into a barrier between flesh and frozen earth. The whole camp bends toward night as surely as a town bends toward sunset. The smell changes again as evening approaches. More wood smoke. The first thicker scent of supper. Stew, if fortune is kind. Though fortune in military camps usually arrives thin and heavily diluted. Still, the promise of hot food draws men inward. Bowls are found. Bread portioned. A little grease gleams on the surface of a pot, and everyone suddenly believes in civilization again. You eat before full dark, because to wait would be foolish. Once the light goes, everything becomes slower, clumsier, more expensive in effort. Around the nearest fires, men crouch close with bowls in hand, faces lit from below, steam moving between them like breath made visible. Supper conversation is heavier than morning talk. Men speak of home, often disguised as complaints about food. One man claims the stew contains more water than the river. Another replies that this is slander against the river. It is not elegant humor, but it lands, and the light keeps fading. One by one, tasks become silhouettes. Rope lines disappear until they catch a shoulder. The far tents flatten into dark shapes. Fires take command of the camp again, each one a red center, with men orbiting close. The sentries are chosen. Cloaks pulled tight. Last trips made beyond the tent line. Water set aside. Boots arranged where they can be found half asleep in darkness. Weapons laid within reach, not because every soldier expects attack, but because one learns quickly that fumbling for steel in the dark makes a fool of any man. You kneel at the tent entrance before going in and look once more at the sleeping place, improved as much as poor means allow. A little drier, a little thicker. Straw spread with almost ceremonial care. Cloaks folded to serve as extra padding where hip and shoulder will press. It is not much, yet the sight gives a ridiculous little pulse of satisfaction. There it is, your estate, your winter palace, your narrow republic of cloth and compromise. Soon you will duck inside, pull the flap close, and give your body back to wool, straw, darkness, and the breathing of other men. The whole rough cycle will begin again. But now, in this last hour before full night, with the fire low and the tent waiting, you understand something essential. Medieval soldiers did not merely endure winter nights. They spent the day building them, improving them, bargaining with them in advance, preparing just enough protection to make sleep possible one more time. By full dark, the camp has become a constellation of low human stars, each fire burning inside its own ring of need. Beyond those circles, the winter field disappears so completely that it might as well be the edge of the world. Canvas walls catch a little glow, then lose it. Rope lines vanish. Men step carefully by memory more than sight. The air sharpens with every passing minute, and everyone in camp feels the same old truth settling over them. Whatever warmth there is now must be made, guarded, and shared before night takes full possession. You duck into the tent again, and the darkness inside feels thicker than it did the night before, though that may only be your body remembering. The improved bedding lies ready, which is to say, it lies barely less bad than yesterday. Still, the little changes matter immediately. A bit more brush beneath the straw, a bit less damp at the rear. Cloaks positioned with a strategy that would look absurd to anyone not obliged to sleep here. One rolled bundle under the hips, another under the shoulder. Boots at the entrance, where they can be grabbed at dawn. Bowl turned upside down so nothing crawls into it by surprise. Sword close enough to find in the dark, but not so close that a half-sleeping elbow sends it skidding under 3 other men. These are small arrangements. They are also the difference between a manageable night and a mutiny of the soul. One by one, the others come in after you. The tent changes character with each body. First, it is only dark cloth and cold trapped air. Then a man enters carrying smoke in his cloak. Then another with a muttered joke and a groan as he folds himself down. Another brings the faint smell of horse. Another the iron smell of tools. Another, rather unfortunately, the memory of onions from supper. Very quickly, the tent becomes what all military shelters become after dark. Not private space, but shared weather. A little murmuring passes around while everyone settles. The same practical conversation as every night, though no 2 men speak it the same way. Shift over. Not that far. Mind the shield. Your boot is in my ribs. No, that is not your blanket. Yes, that corner leaks if it rains. No, you cannot have the dry side because none of us has the dry side. Such talk would sound quarrelsome to an outsider. In truth, it is the domestic language of collective survival. Outside, the sentries begin their first full rotation. You hear them distantly, boots on hardened patches of ground, a low voice at the edge of the fire line, the clack of a spear, butt, or staff set down and lifted again. Inside, the men in the tent react in different ways to the cold's advance. One curls at once into himself like a hedgehog in wool. One insists on sitting upright a few minutes longer to rub his feet and swear at the weather with an almost devotional focus. One removes his boots and lines them inside his cloak to keep the leather from freezing too stiff by morning. This, too, is knowledge learned the hard way. Winter punishes neglect with delightful creativity. You follow the same logic. Cloak around shoulders first, then lower body. Hands tucked in while they still hold some warmth. Chin lowered. Breathing turned inward through the cloth so that each breath gives back a trace of heat to the face. This is not elegance. It is engineering. Necessity turns everyone into an inventor. Give people enough discomfort, and they become philosophers of fabric and air. The fire outside drops lower, then flares as someone feeds it. The light along the seam of the tent trembles with it. For a few seconds, everyone inside pauses, unconsciously attentive. Firelight on canvas is the camp's shared heartbeat. Too bright, and men worry about wasted fuel or stray sparks. Too dim, and a small private unease rises in every chest. There are no clocks here. Not really. Only stages of darkness and the health of coals. A man near you begins telling a story softly, perhaps because fatigue makes silence too large. It is not a story of battle. It is of a pig stolen from a priest, a cart mired axle deep, a wife who could scold a thunderstorm into changing direction, or so he claims. Medieval camp talk leaned heavily toward the local and ridiculous once the important tasks were done. Not because soldiers were shallow, but because the ridiculous is one of the few things that survives cold intact. Men laugh quietly. One tells him his wife sounds more dangerous than the enemy. Another says that if she were here, the whole army would have dry boots by morning out of fear. The story grows. Embellishment blooms. For a minute, the tent is warmer with laughter than with cloth. That warmth matters. Not all camps managed it. Morale is one of those slippery historical words that sounds abstract until you place it under canvas in freezing dark. Morale is whether men still joke when the straw stinks, whether they pass the better scrap of blanket without starting a war, whether they trust one another enough to sleep, whether a snoring man is tolerated because he is one of us rather than hated because he is one more burden. Commanders could issue orders all day, but morale at midnight belonged to the tent. The story fades. One soldier is already asleep, or close enough to it that he answers a question with a noise no human language has yet claimed. Another scratches at his neck, then at his wrist, and mutters that the fleas have survived more campaigns than any Christian king. Someone replies that they deserve wages by now. More laughter, softer this time, almost part of sleep itself. Then comes the long inward turn of the night. You lie still, and the body begins its careful accounting. Feet first. Are they numb or merely cold? Hands. Can they still feel the seam of the cloak? Back. Has the improved bedding changed anything worth the labor? Hips. Shoulders. Neck. The answer in every case is some version of enough. Not good. Not terrible. Enough. For the medieval soldier, enough was a kingdom. There is moisture in the canvas again. Not rain, only the quiet damp that gathers from breath and weather, and the stubborn fact that cloth is no fortress. It carries a smell almost mineral, part wet rope, part old smoke, part earth. Beneath it, the straw adds its own dry, dusty sweetness, now bruised by use into something flatter and more tired. Wool dominates everything. Wet wool. Warming wool. Wool that scratches, weighs, shelters, and stinks. If hell had a uniform scent, I suspect part of it would be wet wool in a closed tent. Yet I say that with affection, because wet wool also saved more lives than many grander inventions. A small draft slips beneath the flap and trails over your face. Someone near the entrance curses, half asleep, and shoves a bundle against the gap. Better. Then too little air. Then one man complains that we will all suffocate like sausages in a skin. The bundle is shifted back a little. Such governance, such constitutional balance, reached at midnight by freezing men under canvas. Parliament could learn from them, though perhaps it would need more fleas to stay humble. You know that feeling when the body is almost asleep, but the mind suddenly decides to return to every discomfort one by one. That is the next phase. You become aware of the man breathing behind you, of one knee resting somewhere impossible, of the strap buckle pressing through the cloak under your arm, of a distant horse kicking a board, of your own bladder, which has chosen this exact moment to become interested in morality. Do you stay warm and uncomfortable, or leave the tent and preserve dignity at the price of cold? Medieval nights were full of such profound philosophical tests. For a while, at least, you refuse the journey. So does everyone else, judging by the remarkable stillness. Outside, the camp continues in lowered tones. A burst of louder voices for a moment, perhaps over a fire, quickly shushed. A dog barks, then thinks better of it. Harness rattles near the horse lines. Somewhere wood splits with a small explosive sound as a log gives way in the flames. You can build a map of the camp through hearing alone now. Fire there. Horses there. The command tents farther off, where a better ordered quiet perhaps holds. The outer watch beyond, where dark meets darker. Inside the tent, heat grows slowly, not from comfort, but from accumulation. Body by body, breath by breath, the air turns thick. The first edge of cold withdraws from your chest, then from your legs. The face stays cold. The nose always stays cold. But the core of you begins to believe it might survive until dawn. This is how winter camp sleep wins its arguments. Never magnificently, only by persuading the body, little by little, to stop expecting death from the next gust. No army that failed at night could function by day. Sleep, even bad sleep, was strategy. Shelter was strategy. Shared heat was strategy. The simple decision to halt near wood, water, and decent ground could shape the next day's marching power more than one clever speech from a mounted lord. And still the body remains a suspicious creature. Just as sleep begins to soften everything, a sound pulls you upward again. Not danger. Only a man in the neighboring tent coughing with such theatrical violence that it seems an attempt at performance. He coughs, spits, coughs again, then falls silent. Every tent around him has been forced briefly into fellowship with his lungs. One of your companions whispers that if the man survives winter, the devil must have refused him for noise. No one laughs loudly, but shoulders shake in the dark. This is the second sleep approaching now, usually the best one. Not the first exhausted collapse, but the deeper surrender that comes after the body has tested the ground, the air, the warmth, and decided there is no better arrangement available. Around you, the breathing changes. Slower, heavier. A snore begins, then another. One man turns and settles with a long exhale that sounds almost grateful. The tent itself seems to lower into stillness. Your own thoughts drift, not toward battle, strangely enough, not toward kings or banners or whatever argument brought the army here. Those things belong to daylight and command on. Night narrows ambition. You think, instead of fixed hearths, dry benches, roofs that do not move in the wind, a door that latches cleanly, perhaps a dog asleep by a warm wall, perhaps even a bowl that does not need to be guarded against insects. The imagination becomes modest under hardship. Home is never more powerful than when defined by tiny conveniences. If you were standing here with me, outside the tent perhaps, looking at the low red glow through the seams, hearing the muffled chorus of tired men drifting at last into sleep, you might realize how false our grand medieval fantasies can be. The romance of banners vanishes at this distance. What remains is more intimate. Men making a shelter do more than it ought to. Men arranging their bodies like puzzle pieces against cold. Men laughing in whispers because bitterness would keep them awake. Men trusting thin cloth, coals, and each other. That trust is perhaps the bravest thing in camp. Hours pass in their uneven way. The fire outside sinks, is fed, sinks again. The air inside cools a little, warms a little. Once or twice you wake enough to pull the cloak higher or tuck a hand deeper into wool. Once, a man near the entrance leaves the tent and returns, trailing a knife edge of air so cruel that everyone nearest him makes the same wounded noise at once. He apologizes to no one. No one expects it. Some things are understood to be beyond apology. There may be frost forming now on the outer ropes. There may be a skin of ice in the buckets. There may be stars above the camp, hard and bright as hammered nails. You do not see them. The tent has become your whole universe again. Cloth, breath, weight, faint ember light, smell of smoke, smell of men, smell of damp earth held just below you by straw and stubborn hope. Then at last, somewhere beyond thought, the body stops negotiating. It sleeps. Not beautifully, not deeply in the way modern comfort imagines deep sleep, but sufficiently, enough to knit a little strength back into the muscles, enough to carry a man through to dawn, enough to preserve temper, judgment, and the next day's work. In a winter camp, that kind of sleep is not failure. It is triumph, disguised as survival. And outside, while the sentries keep their slow, dark watch and the fires nurse their final coals, the whole army lies suspended in that fragile collective surrender. Hundreds or thousands of human beings trusting canvas, wool, and routine against the long, cold night. Each tent, a small republic of discomfort and endurance. Each sleeping man held there until the first gray line of morning once again begins to loosen the darkness from the seams. Somewhere before dawn, before any honest light has entered the world, the camp begins to stir from inside its own sleep. Not all at once. Never all at once. A winter army wakes the way an old fire wakes. First with a faint pulse under ash, then with a little crackle, then with a slow return of shape and intention. You feel it before you fully understand it. A man near the tent wall shifts and pulls in a sharper breath. Another coughs into his cloak. Someone outside walks past with the careful dragging step of a sentry nearly finished with his watch. The darkness remains complete, but it is no longer the deep, settled darkness of midnight. It has become waiting darkness. Your body notices this before your thoughts do. The warmth created by packed sleep has thinned. The air inside the tent feels colder on the face. One shoulder aches where the ground won the argument sometime in the night. A hand has gone numb under its own weight. Your mouth tastes faintly of smoke and stale breath. The straw beneath you has flattened into a shape that now belongs partly to you, which is as close to luxury as a campaign can manage. You lie still for a moment, because stillness is a bargain. As long as no one speaks, as long as no one truly rises, the night is not finished demanding endurance, and the day has not yet begun demanding labor. This narrow strip between sleeping and waking may be the gentlest space a soldier owns. No one can keep it long, but for a few breaths it exists. Then a man at the entrance whispers that the fire is nearly gone, and the spell breaks. At once the tent becomes a place of persons again, rather than bundled shapes. Cloaks rustle. Knees draw up. Boots are hunted by touch. Someone knocks a bowl and mutters at it, as if the bowl arranged the collision out of spite. A companion beside you sits upright too quickly, then pauses with that particular silence, by which a man admits to himself that every joint in his body is still present and angry. Another says he dreamed he was sleeping in his mother's loft, warm as a kitten in old hay, and that waking here should be considered a sin against nature. That earns a few low noises of agreement. Outside, the camp is already carrying on the first duties of morning. You can hear men crouching over embers, blowing life into coals. There is a different sound to that than to any other task. A careful, urgent breathing, followed by the dry click of twigs, and then the small, blessed answer of flame. Fires must be raised before hands can function well, before food can be managed, before water can be warmed enough to stop feeling like punishment. A winter camp may talk of battle, orders, scouts, and strategy. But every morning begins in worship of combustion. You push yourself upright, and the cold enters at once. where shared warmth had been. There is always that cruel little shock. The body, having survived the night, feels briefly betrayed by dawn. Cloth that kept some heat while you slept now feels damp at the edges. Your boots, though kept close, are still stiff. Pulling them on requires both hands, a little swearing, and the humility to accept that leather in winter possesses a personality almost entirely malicious. One of the men in the tent grins through chattering teeth and says the devil himself must wear boots like these. Another replies that if he did, hell would be frozen too. This is what passes for philosophy before sunrise. It is not inferior philosophy. It arrives from evidence. When you duck out beneath the tent flap, the air meets you like river water. Clean, sharp, metallic. The camp lies under a skin of gray that has not yet become light. Fires blink here and there, low and red at first, then yellow, where someone has coaxed them back properly. Beyond them stand the long rows of tents, softened by frost, every rope marked out with pale whiteness. Boots have already made black paths through the frozen mud, though those paths will soon loosen into mire when the day advances. For this short hour, the ground is caught between hardness and ruin. The whole army seems to breathe smoke. It lifts from cook fires, from warming hands, from the mouths of men and horses. It hangs low, reluctant to rise in the cold, so that the camp looks half built from mist and half from cloth. Nearby, a boy, or near enough to a boy that his beard still seems undecided, hunches over a flame and turns a crust of bread in both hands, as if merely showing it the fire might improve its quality. A veteran next to him has stripped off one glove to inspect a split in the skin of his thumb. He presses grease into it with the solemn concentration of a monk illuminating a sacred page. These are the real ceremonies of mourning. If you stand still long enough, more details reveal themselves. A horse stamping repeatedly, impatient for fodder. A cook stirring a pot whose contents are not yet promising but are at least hot. A pair of men carrying a log between them with the tired competence of those who have done the same thing on too many mornings to waste any speech on it. A servant from one of the command tents, shaking frost from a folded mantle. A priest or chaplain moving quietly between fires, cloak hemmed dark with damp, speaking to those already awake. He offers no grand sermon, only a murmur, a blessing, perhaps a question asked softly enough that a soldier can answer without feeling observed. Faith in a winter camp often sounded like this, less like proclamation and more like company. The eastern edge of the sky begins at last to loosen. Not color yet, only a dilution of darkness. The kind of change you might miss if you were indoors and soft, but not here, not among people who live by what the sky decides. Men turn their heads almost unconsciously toward it. Dawn matters because it restores distance. In full night, the world ends at the fire line. In morning, you can once again see where you are, how much weather there is, how far the land stretches, whether the roads ahead look passable, whether any movement on the horizon belongs to friends, enemies, or nothing but crows. You warm your hands over a fire that has just now become useful. The heat is uneven and glorious. One knuckle burns while the rest of the hand remains cold. You turn slowly, presenting palm, back, then fingertips. Medieval comfort often arrived by fractions. A little warmth, a little food, a little less damp than yesterday. Enough to make the next hour possible. Whole happiness was rare. Partial relief ruled the camp. Breakfast, if such an honorable word can be used, begins moving through the tents in rough forms. Bread, always. Perhaps pottage thinned by necessity. Perhaps yesterday's stew reawakened into new life by the argument that boiling forgives all things. A little cheese if stores hold. A little ale. Weak and practical. Hot liquid where available. Men do not greet these offerings with delight so much as with gratitude, stripped of ceremony. Eating in cold weather feels less like pleasure than like reinforcing a wall before weather strikes again. One soldier tears his bread and holds it toward the fire first. Not enough to toast it, only enough to soften what the night has made hard. Another dips his portion into a bowl and lets it sit there until a companion accuses him of trying to drown the meal out of mercy. A third eats with astonishing speed and then denies having done so when accused. Around the fire, the ordinary theater of companionship returns. Someone is always too slow. Someone is always too greedy. Someone claims his ration has mysteriously shrunk compared with yesterday. A miracle so consistent, it ought to have its own saint. Yet beneath all this runs the camp's deeper current of readiness. Mourning in an army is never merely domestic. Men eat while listening. They warm themselves while watching the command area. They mend a strap and keep one eye on the roads. News might arrive. Orders might change. A peaceful dawn can turn in an instant toward movement. So every act of comfort contains a margin of caution. You feel it when the horn sounds from farther off. Not alarm, only signal. Heads rise. Conversation pose, then resumes in lower tones. Another call follows. Routine, perhaps a change in watch or a summons among officers. Still, the body marks it. Army life teaches the muscles to attend before the mind has decided whether it wishes to. As the light strengthens, the camp becomes less forgiving to look at. Frost reveals every stain before it melts. Canvas shows every patch. Faces show every lost hour. Men who seemed almost cozy by firelight now look what they are. Tired, wind-worn, smoke-colored, carrying the long arithmetic of poor sleep in the set of their mouths and the careful way they straighten their backs. And yet they are somehow stronger for being seen plainly. The truth of camp life is ugly in places, but it is sturdy. Nothing here depends on illusion for long. Work begins again immediately, because it must. Bedding is lifted and shaken while there is still a little dry firmness in the air. Cloaks are thrown open to catch what weak sun may come. Buckets go toward water. Knives are set to bread. Rope, leather, twine. Horses are checked. Harness buckles tested. The tent that kept you through the night is now examined like a machine. Where did the draft enter? Which seam gave trouble? How should the bedding lie tonight? What can be improved before the next dark brings the same contest again? That is, perhaps the secret center of all this. Medieval soldiers survived not because they ignored hardship, but because they studied it. Every bad night became instruction. Every leak, Every chill, every ache in the hip or shoulder entered a private record. Tonight we lay the straw thicker near the rear. Tonight the flap must be weighted lower. Tonight, boots stay deeper in the cloak. Tonight I sleep with my feet toward the better warmth. Campaign life was full of suffering, yes, but it was also full of adaptation, so detailed it became a craft. A man near you holds up a cracked wooden bowl against the morning light, squints, and declares that with enough luck and one iron hoop, it still has 3 campaigns in it. His friend says the bowl has perhaps 1 breakfast left and is only delaying its death out of spite. The owner kisses it and says loyalty must be rewarded. Such tenderness toward bad objects is one of the loveliest things in hard histories. When things are scarce, affection extends itself in practical directions. By full morning, the camp no longer belongs to sleep at all. Night has withdrawn into memory and sore muscle. But you carry its lessons with you. You know now how many men fit warmth into one tent. How laughter sounds when spoken through cold cloth. How smoke settles in wool. How dawn looks when it has to earn its way into a winter field full of weary soldiers. Most of all, you understand that the medieval military camp was never just a place of war. It was also a place where human beings, under relentless conditions, kept rebuilding the possibility of rest from almost nothing. One night after another, one fire after another, one rude little shelter after another. And as the morning opens wider, and the camp steps fully back into labor, that knowledge stays near you like banked heat, quiet, persistent, ready to matter again when the next evening begins its slow descent. Once the morning has fully broken and the camp has given itself back to daylight, it becomes possible to imagine that the night was only an interruption, only a hard chapter between 2 useful hours. But that would be the wrong way to understand it. For the medieval soldier, night was not the absence of the real experience. Night was the test that proved whether the rest of the army could continue at all. You walk now along the outer edge of the camp with that thought warming somewhere beneath the ribs. The ground is waking underfoot. Frost loosens. Mud returns. Smoke rises straighter as the air softens by the smallest degree. Men have become busy enough that their discomfort no longer advertises itself so openly. That is another mercy of daylight. It grants distraction. A man carrying wood does not have time to dwell on how badly he slept. A groom rubbing down a horse must think of the horse. A cook scraping a pot must think of the pot. In camp, purpose often served as pain management, and still the evidence of the night remains everywhere. It remains in the straw shaken from cloaks, in the bent posture of men warming hands for the 2nd or 3rd time that morning, in the ash trenches dug close to certain tents, in the dark crescents beneath the eyes of those who took watch, in the careful way blankets are folded, dried, or aired to keep them from becoming a colder enemy after sunset. A winter camp after dawn is like a shoreline after tide. The waters have gone out, but the shape of what passed over remains. If you stand back far enough, the army seems almost organized. Tent lines, horse lines, command area, cook spaces, wagon park, sentry routes, refuse pits, little paths of trampled earth linking one necessity to another. Yet when you move close, organization gives way to improvisation. One tent has laid brush under everything. Another has found old planks. One company has built a windbreak from shields and spare poles. Another has hung extra cloth at the entrance. One fire is always better tended than the rest, because one man among them was born with the soul of a jealous innkeeper and cannot endure bad coals. Camp life was communal, but comfort was often won by the talents of particular individuals. That is true in nearly every age, I think. Human survival in groups depends less than we like to admit on the presence of one person who knows how to mend, one who can cook, one who jokes at the right moment, one who remembers where the dry wood was stacked, one who notices a sick horse before anyone else does. Great chronicles name kings. Real knights are saved by ordinary specialists. You pass a cluster of men spreading damp cloaks on a rope to catch what daylight they can. They handle the cloth with care, because every cloak is a wall, a roof, a mattress, a blanket, a badge, a shelter of first and last resort. Nearby, another pair of soldiers turns over armfuls of straw with boots and sticks, hoping to save enough dryness for the coming evening. They look less like warriors than farmers rescuing a crop after rain, which in its way is exactly what they are doing. An army in camp spends half its intelligence on tomorrow night's sleep. From one of the larger tents comes the scent of warmed wine or spiced broth, perhaps for an officer, perhaps for the sick. Not all bellies are treated alike. Not all bodies are given the same means against winter. It would be dishonest to smooth that over. Medieval war carried hierarchy into every hour. Better boots for some, better fur linings, better tent cloth, better servants to prepare a better bed. Yet even here, under the uneven hand of rank, the same knight still descended on all. The nobleman might have a brazier and a thicker palate, but he still listened for the weather. He still counted on the loyalty of those outside his pavilion. He still woke if a horse cried out in the dark. Winter has a rude democracy. It never became fair, but it reminded everyone that the body could not be entirely ordered by status. A little farther on, you find a place where the camp gives way to field, and there you stop. The land rolls out in winter colors: brown, gray, pale green, where stubborn life still clings low to the ground. Trees stand bare. The road away from camp is a scar of wheel ruts and hooves. Somewhere down that road are villages, mills, churches, barns, perhaps a monastery, perhaps a market town with roofs close together and bread ovens already lit. Somewhere beyond are homes with shutters, lofts, dry floors, and hearths fixed in one place. The soldiers know these places exist. Many dream of them each night. Yet for now, the camp is their settlement, their weather, their household, their chance, and their burden. That, more than anything, is what I want you to feel about everyday military life in the medieval world. Not only the danger, though danger was always near. Not only the glory, which in truth was intermittent and often overstated, but the daily remaking of shelter, the effort to convert exposed ground into a survivable human space, the strange intimacy of sleeping among men who are not family and may not even be friends, yet whose warmth and habits and patience become as necessary as your own cloak. If you were standing here with me, looking back toward the lines of tents and the small moving figures among them, you might realize how modern our misunderstandings can be. We imagine the medieval soldier always marching, always charging, always shouting beneath banners. But much of his life, perhaps the greater part during campaign, was spent negotiating very plain questions. Is the straw dry enough? Will the seam hold? Can the fire be kept low and long? How many can fit under this shelter? Who watches first? Can the boots be saved from freezing stiff? Does the horse have enough feed? Will the rain turn? Will the road bear weight tomorrow? These questions do not make for illuminated manuscripts. They do, however, make for truth. Around the camp, the morning ripens toward noon. Orders will come, or not. Men will drill, or wait. Supplies will be counted. Harness checked. Weapons cleaned. The day will fill itself with its usual stern practicality. But because we have passed through the night with them, because we have sat under canvas and listened to their breathing, because we have felt the damp wool and the hard earth and the mean little generosity of shared warmth, the army now appears differently. Less like a machine, more like a temporary village of exhausted experts in endurance. One soldier near the cook line has fallen into an argument over the best way to bank a fire against wind. Another insists that half the camp would perish if left alone with coals and wet wood. A third says they would not perish, merely produce such smoke that the enemy would surrender from pity. It is low humor, bred humor, camp humor, but it reveals again the quality that runs beneath everything. Men survive not just through obedience or toughness, but through conversation, imitation, correction, memory, and the steady exchange of tricks. Medieval camps were schools in which the curriculum was discomfort, and the final examination came every evening. You notice a strip of cloth tied around a tent peg to make it easier to find in the dark. A row of stones arranged so a sleepy man will not stumble straight into a fire. A shield leaned in such a way that it blocks the worst draft near one sleeping place. A little trench cut by boot heel and knife point so melted frost drains away from a tent's entrance. These are not dramatic gestures. They are brilliant ones. The history of ordinary human ingenuity is full of such things. And war, for all its cruelty, preserved many of them in concentrated form. Put enough people in one hard place, and necessity breeds invention faster than comfort ever can. Of course, not every night ended in simple survival. Sometimes weather turned. Sometimes orders came to move. Sometimes alarm broke, sleep apart. Sometimes men woke to attack, or to sickness, or to news that changed the whole shape of the next day. A camp was never safe in any complete sense. It only built islands of safety as best it could. That uncertainty gave the nightly rituals their power. A man might not control the war. He could still fold his cloak well. He could still dry his socks. He could still place his sword where his hand would find it. He could still laugh before sleeping. Those acts were small forms of command. By now the sun has climbed high enough to flatten the last blue shadows under the tents. Faces are clearer. The miseries of the night have retreated into anecdote and stiffness. Men who shivered in the dark now carry pails, scold mules, patch leather, flirt with disaster at the cook fires, and prepare themselves without fanfare for whatever comes next. This daily recovery is so ordinary that it becomes almost invisible. Yet it is miraculous in its own rough way. Human beings are astonishingly repetitive creatures. Give them hardship and they will answer with routine. Give them exposure and they will answer with arrangement. Give them another cold night and they will build, from almost nothing, another chance at sleep. That is the final image I want to leave resting beside you. Not the charge, not the clash, not the king on horseback, but the soldier after dark, kneeling to spread one more layer of straw. The soldier turning his boots upside down by the flap. The soldier shifting shoulder to shoulder with others under a low canvas roof while the wind worries the ropes outside. The soldier half asleep, half listening, trusting coals, cloth, and companionship to hold back the freezing field for a few more hours. The soldier at dawn, rising sore and smoky, and beginning again anyway. If we listen closely enough, the camp tells us what history often forgets to say outright. That survival has a texture, that endurance makes sounds, that whole worlds are built from ordinary acts repeated without witness, that men in winter armies did not simply sleep badly. They constructed sleep out of mud, smoke, wool, laughter, discipline, and stubborn skill. They made a human night in an inhuman season, and because they did, the army moved another day. Now the fires are fully awake. The ropes shine wet instead of white. The field beyond the camp has lost its early ghostliness and become only land again. The soldiers, one by one, disappear back into the business of daylight. But you have seen what the daylight rests upon. You have seen the hidden architecture beneath the march, the command, the battle, the chronicler's noble phrases. You have seen the blanket folded twice over the feet, the better place near the wall won by argument, the half-frozen joke at dawn, the smoke trapped in cloth, the low breathing of men who must trust one another enough to sleep. So let the image soften now. Let the camp recede a little into the winter distance. Let the horses quiet. Let the tent lines blur. Let the smell of wool and ash fade into something gentler. Let the hard ground become only memory. Let the coals lower themselves in your mind to a steady red. Let the centuries pass without urgency. Let the voices near the fire soften into the harmless murmur of tired men speaking because sleep is nearly here. Let the canvas hold against the wind one more time. Let the straw be just dry enough. Let the body at last stop bargaining with the cold. And as the whole medieval camp settles again in imagination, as another evening prepares itself somewhere beyond this page, as another row of tents waits for coals, cloaks, and human patience, you can leave them there safely, each man folded into his rough little kingdom of wool and darkness, each fire watching its circle of faces, each shelter doing its humble best against the season. The long night coming gently down over iron, leather, frost, smoke, and sleep. Good night.